This is the Keys to the Shop Rate of Rise series, brought to you by Roast Magazine. Today we're talking about roasting tools with Kat Melheim of coffeepeople.org. Well, hey everybody, this is Chris DeFuria with Keys to the Shop. Welcome to another edition of the Rate of Rise series. This series is brought to you by Roast Magazine, which is one of the longest running and most respected trade journals in the coffee industry. When you subscribe to and read Roast Magazine, you get to keep up with the latest research, knowledge, and insights from scientists, subject matter experts, and professionals from across the industry to make you a better roaster, to help you run a successful roasting business. If you're a roaster, or if you're thinking about roasting your own coffee, then you definitely need to be subscribed to Roast Magazine. Their dedication to coffee roasters goes well beyond the magazine into publishing books, providing resources, and just being a strong advocate for the craft of coffee roasting. So to learn more and subscribe, go visit them over at roastmagazine.com. Okay, everyone. Well, welcome to another episode of the Rate of Rise series. I'm excited to have you along today as we talk about tools of the trade of roasters, as well as the philosophy of how to approach getting the right tools and using them well in your roastery, and much, much more. Today's guest is Kat Melheim. For the past 5 years, Kat has been deeply involved in the coffee industry, the founder of Coffee People Zine, which is a magazine dedicated to showcasing artists, musicians, and general creative expressions from within the coffee community, which has been a really successful project. Kat, throughout her roasting career, has been focused not only on perfecting her own craft, but also being generous with helping other people do the same with theirs. She has resourced, educated, demystified, and generally made the roasting space a better place for everybody. Currently, Kat is roasting over at Black and White Coffee in Durham, North Carolina. Kat was also briefly a guest on the show a few years ago when I paid a visit to Coffee Champs in Nashville. So I'll link to that in the show notes. But now I'm happy to have Kat on the show for a good chunk of time to talk about the article that she wrote for Roast Magazine's most current issue, November-December issue. The article is called The Coffee Roaster's Toolkit, and it talks about essential equipment and resources for commercial coffee roasters. And I thought it would be really fun to talk to Kat about her own career and how she developed as a roaster and what kind of tools and resources helped her develop, and then get her opinions and advice for those of us who really want to resource ourselves and our people in the roastery with not just the best tools out there, but the right tools for you, and how to tell the difference and prioritize for your unique situation. Kat's heart for the community, experience in roasting, and genuine desire to see others succeed makes her the perfect person to talk to about this. So I hope that you get a lot out of it today, and let's get right to the conversation. Here now is my interview on the Coffee Roaster's Toolkit with Kat Melheim. Well, Kat, welcome to Keys to the Shop. I'm really excited to have this conversation. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm just fine. We were chatting a little bit before. I'm a little bit jacked up on caffeine right now. I started my leaderboard coffees, and so it makes me feel like I'm back at the cupping table. So it's very nostalgic and very energizing.
Love it.
Yeah. So, well, I am really excited to talk to you because I've followed your work for quite some time and have a lot of respect for you. And generally, I'd say the theme I get from your career is generosity in terms of putting good information out there for people who want to learn how to roast well. You're very transparent about the process. I've really enjoyed your videos, your publications, and now this article in Roast Magazine on the tools, like the Roaster's Toolkit. And I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into this. In particular, get a little bit of your background in roasting and talk about your perspective on the tools necessary for being a great roaster, or setting ourselves up to be great roasters. So how did you, I want to start in the beginning, of course, what was the discovery process for roasting for you? And in that time, like, what was that moment where you're like, you know what, this is something of a viable career, and I really want to continue and grow in this?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, first of all, for the words of of those kind words. I definitely try to be transparent and generous. So I'm really glad that that comes across, because I feel like, and I'll kind of get into this with this answer. I feel like I've really been fortunate in my kind of roasting trajectory to have access to information, to have access to community, to have access to just a roaster to start on, that I think a lot of other people don't necessarily have the same opportunities that I've been fortunate enough to have. I feel like in the roasting world, there's kind of this trope that in order to become a roaster, you have to spend like 3 years as a production assistant, and then you can maybe work your way up to like roasting assistant, and then you can maybe someday become a head roaster. And it like there's this idea that it takes a lot of time and you have to kind of pay your dues, I suppose.
Right.
And my the way that I discovered roasting was I had been working as a barista and cafe manager for a couple of years. And I realized that I wanted to stay in coffee, but I didn't necessarily want to stay in the cafe. I love being a barista and I love the customer interactions, but I kind of saw that running into like there was a plateau or like a ceiling that you come into. Like basically you get to being a cafe manager and then that's kind of it. And how do you there isn't really farther that trajectory can take you. So I decided to try and switch gears and get into the roasting side of things, because one thing that I love is continual learning. And so that was a thing that drew me to roasting, that I saw like you can keep learning new coffees, you can keep learning new machines, new ways of roasting. And there's kind of like an endless amount of growth that you could have as a coffee roaster. So I got myself a job as a barista at a coffee company that had a roaster as well. So it was Logan House Coffee Company in Denver, Colorado. Shout out to Logan House. So I started working for them actually their second day of their cafe opening, and they had a roasting operation first. So they had been roasting for a number of years, and then they opened this cafe. And really, again, like it was good luck on my part, because I came in just as they were really growing. And one of the owners, my boss, Andre, had been doing all of the roasting for the company up to that point. But then with a cafe open, suddenly the workload just exponentially exploded. And so he didn't really have time to manage the cafe and do all of the roasting, especially because the volume immediately increased. So he basically just said, does anybody want to learn how to roast? And I raised my hand and was like, yeah, teach me. Like, I would love to learn. And it was like a very quick trajectory from me basically saying, I want to learn to roast, and then doing a couple of batches here and there, to really just taking over the entire roasting operation. And not only did Andre teach me really everything that he knew, but he also allowed me to go to industry events to learn more. And he really encouraged me in my learning, in my growth, and allowed me also to have to give feedback, to say, hey, I think that, this coffee could be better this way, or let's try and bring in this other particular coffee. So like that openness on his part really gave me the space and the encouragement to get into roasting in a really painless way. I mean, learning is hard, and taking on new projects, new roles can be difficult. And there was definitely a learning curve, but I didn't meet with resistance. I didn't have to try and push through or prove my worth, like a lot of people, I think. And yeah, that is what really inspired me to latch on to roasting and to continue, because and it's fun. Like you just get to taste delicious things and make delicious things.
You hit on something I think that's really important, which is the idea of being comfortable in your position in order to be able to focus on what you're doing rather than on being or belonging. As we talk, we'll talk about tools and things. It feels like, the first thing is you have to find what fits you, or at least know that you fit in a place. So if you're questioning, is this for me, or do they want me, or all that stuff, it's really hard to thrive as a technician and an artist in that role. As you started to become more adept at roasting, as you went to industry events and learned more, I imagine the things that you learned ended up making the coffee there better, making you a better roaster. And as you developed some more comfort with roasting, I imagine you became a little bit more particular about the things that you wanted from a roasting experience as a roaster. So taking the next step, were you pickier in what you chose in terms of, now I want to challenge myself more, or it's a more narrow range of options for you?
I don't know that I felt like I needed to find a narrower range necessarily, especially because like Logan House, when I was learning, Logan House was growing so much at the same time. And so we went from a small, basically I was with them in a transition from a very small, very automated roaster to buying a much bigger roaster with a lot more control. And so I felt like I was just expanding and expanding and expanding during that time, which I really loved. I really value freedom and the ability to kind of like choose your path. Sometimes that can be like shooting myself in the foot because I get too big of ideas, and that can kind of be a barrier to learning when you really need to focus in. If that makes sense. I don't know.
Well, how so? And I imagine my first thought when you say it's a barrier to learning, when you think too big, is it because you're not digging deep enough into the things that you have around you right now?
Yeah, sometimes I think that if you don't spend time and hone one thing and you try to skip to the next thing, then you don't have a complete understanding of the first thing, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, it makes sense. Your comfort level, especially being new, it maybe this is something that people can understand also through the barista world, where once you get your certificate or whatever, pass your onboarding, you learn how to pour a tulip then all of a sudden your sights go to, I'm going to compete in the World Barista Championships, and but you're still not cleaning the condiment bar. You're still not.
Right. Yeah. No, that's definitely a good point. And that kind of makes me think of, so Andre definitely taught me everything that he knew, but then very quickly I took over all of the roasting operations because he had a lot of other things and a lot of other responsibilities in the cafe and in the business. And so I didn't really ever have apprenticeship, or I never really roasted under someone consistently and constantly in order to learn kind of those baseline norms, maybe, which I liked at the time, I think, because I could do whatever I wanted. I could create whatever systems I wanted. I could, like I could try anything, but which was fun, but it also was a bit of a frustration because I didn't have like someone else's shoulders to stand on a consistent level, if that makes sense. Like I didn't have a baseline understanding of standard operating procedures. I made those up myself, not entirely in a, reinventing the wheel sort of way, but I didn't have input on like, oh, I've, from another roaster of, we've tried these 5 things and we've arrived at solution 6, so we're going to stick with solution 6. I had to kind of go through and try different things until I reached myself solution 6. So yeah, and I've been in other roasteries now since that first job, and I'm like, oh, you use this kind of scoop because it makes the most sense for like ergonomic design. I just bought whatever scoop was on was for sale, or you stage the or you stage the roastery, the warehouse in this particular way because it makes the most sense from green to roasted. I had to kind of create those systems for myself without knowledge of the standard operating procedures in a roastery.
I guess it's a give and take in the
Yeah.
sense that you might have developed some positive skills and character traits as a roaster through having to do it yourself, while at the same time maybe you would have had a little bit more security in knowing that you didn't need to
Totally.
do those things.
Yeah, right. And I very much value kind of learning by doing, but I think that especially when you're learning something that's very complicated, if you have a jumping off point, or if you have the knowledge of someone who's come before you to work off of, you can go farther faster. And so I had that to a certain extent with Andre. But I also then was, yeah, kind of inventing things myself without that like initial building block, I suppose.
So, as a seasoned roaster now, how would you recommend somebody approaches with the appropriate mindset, starting off at that higher level? When you write an article like this and there's all these tools, I can imagine somebody reading this and going like, okay, buying them, buying this, buying that, buying this. I will be a good roaster now. Just like people used to be like, well, it's a 5-bean Italian espresso blend, and therefore it is amazing specialty coffee. So there's kind of a mentality that we have to have, I think, that's unique, that's a balance. I mean, how do you approach this so that you don't let tools sort of cut off critical analysis and growth?
I think you have to really have a balance between confidence and curiosity, like and curiosity with a side of humility. Like you need to know that you need to go in knowing I can learn this. And so maybe it's less a confidence in I'm the best roaster ever now that I have these tools or whatever, but it's more of a confidence in I can learn this, I can experiment with this, I can try new things and be better than I was before. And then also, yeah, an openness and a curiosity to like, okay, what's going to happen? I am going to roast this new coffee and try this new thing. Maybe it's going to work. Maybe it's not. I've done this 500 other times, and who knows what's going to happen on this next one. And that's one thing, kind of going back to my answer about what inspired me to continue with roasting is coffee is an agricultural product, so it changes over time. Green coffee is relatively stable, but it does age and it does change over time. And each harvest is different than the harvest before it. So you really have to be engaged with the coffee. You have to be, consistently in tasting the coffee and watching it to make sure that that you're doing what you're attempting to do with the roasting process.
Right. It's not plug and play. You have to kind of flex with that system. And I imagine you also grow a lot in this process. Like who you are as a roaster today is way different than who you were back then because of your experiences. But, as much as coffee oscillates and is an agricultural crop, I think maybe we are, right? In a sense. Yeah. And so we have to determine what season are we in our lives and have that mindfulness. So I love that, especially with a dose of humility. But it's like a safety net. There's a lot of insecurity starting something, especially I think with roasting. I mean, it's a huge machine. A lot's on the line, and you feel like if this isn't good, then I want to make sure that I get the right stuff. And it's hard to tell somebody, well, you just kind of have to be open to developing as you go.
Yeah, well, and it's also, not only does the coffee change and each coffee is different, but also customer preferences are different. Like I roasted differently at Logan House than I'm roasting currently at, I'm working with Black and White here in Raleigh now.
Mm.
I'm literally on the same machine, and I'm roasting differently because their customer bases require different types of coffee. So something that one customer might absolutely love, another customer might really dislike. And so you have to really find what works for you as a roaster, and also what works for your customers. And hopefully you're finding customers that like the same coffee that you like. But that's not always the case either. You just have to, I think, find ways to be proud of the coffee that you're roasting, and be in service to the customers that you choose to serve.
That kind of brings me to something I wanted to talk about, which was how to prioritize our focus on getting the right tools and making the right decisions. And maybe it's not just physical tools, because in the article you start with the green coffee. And as you talk about customer preferences, imagine it goes all the way back, as far as back as the sourcing of the coffee, to kind of serve that unique audience and your brand. So, I mean, how do we start thinking about developing our tools and resources for our unique roasting operations?
Totally. I think something that I think about, or I would think about, is the impact that each tool would have on your roasting operation. Not everybody needs the newest, state-of-the-art, top-of-the-line, most expensive equipment or tools, because some roaster operations don't require that. And that kind of depends, I think, on the type of coffee that you're trying to put out there, the volume that you have, that you're going through, whether you're serving your coffee in your own cafes or are mostly selling retail and direct to consumer or to other businesses. And there are a lot of different tools out there that many companies don't need, and a lot of tools out there that only very specific companies need. So I think, yeah, prioritizing by impact and how that will either help your workflow or save you time, or also even what will make you feel good while you're roasting, or while you're engaging with the coffee. I think quality of life and engagement in your work is really important. And so, yeah, if there's a tool that can help you love what you're doing more, get that tool. If there's a tool that's going to save you a bunch of time or save you huge headaches, get that, because it'll be better in the long run. But then there are also, yeah, really expensive, really technological tools that might look pretty and might seem interesting, but will really have very little impact on your finished product or your enjoyment of the thing. In fact, like I'm thinking about, like, let's say a water activity meter. So it's like a machine that will calculate the water activity inside of the green beans. Most people don't need that. It provides a data point so that you can approach roasting and be more informed when you're approaching the roasting process. But most people don't need that, and it's expensive, and it adds another step to the roasting process that most people do not need to encounter.
It's so hard to know what's superfluous and what's not. When we're trying to sort out what those things are, the industry shows us these things, and some of our most respected peers in the industry, or people we look up to, as established roasters, like say you're just starting out roasting and you see, well, Onyx Coffee Labs uses this, Black and
Yeah.
White uses that. I should, because I want to be like them. It seems like there's like this first level that you have to force yourself to stay in, seemingly almost to your detriment, because your mind really can't tell the difference between something that's essential right now and something that's not, because you haven't really done it for very long.
I think the way that I would think about that is, are you roasting coffee that you really love? Because if you are, then you don't need extra tools to help get you there. Also, a lot of companies, like let's say Onyx or Black and White, they both have massive catalogs. Like they are roasting dozens of coffees at a time. And most roasters, especially like smaller roasters, probably don't have that many different types of coffee all at once. So when you're roasting a bunch of different types of coffees, the more data you have on each coffee, the better, because you can hone your roasts to really, so you can do the best you can with a huge variety of different coffees. If you're mostly roasting coffees from the same origin, or like fewer number of coffees that are more similar to one another, you have, I think, like there's like less of a spectrum that you have to really cover, and so you don't need as much like technological know-how, or technological data points. The other thing I would say is that there is really no substitute for time on the roaster. Nothing. Like I would encourage anybody who's like, oh, I need to get better at roasting, I want my coffee to be better, let me buy this tool, this tool, this tool. No, just spend more time on the roaster, spend more time at the cupping table, and spend more time engaging with the roasting process, because that's really, there is no shortcut to understanding the roasting process. It's, you like have to put time into that.
I'm glad you said that. It's you are, and no slight against anybody, it sounds bad, but you are a tool.
Yeah,
You are a
for sure.
an instrument, a finely tuned instrument, and maybe you would atrophy certain faculties if you decided that they needed to be outsourced prematurely before developing that. So it feels like tools are like supplemental things that help support the expertise within your own noggin, right? And so time on the machine of, time on the floor as a barista, time on the machine as a roaster for sure. And
Right.
you mentioned these large catalogs of coffee, and I can hear somebody maybe saying, well, I definitely want to start out with, 24 coffees because I want to have a variety. And I don't know, I don't want to say it's absolutely wrong, but I wonder what you would say to somebody. Is it necessary for someone who's just starting out in roasting, or is a smaller roaster, to really stay limited in their scope in order to not have to spread their attention across such a large catalog?
Yeah, I would say it depends on your goals, because if you really want to put out 24 different coffees, go for it. And if you don't spend enough time with each coffee is probably not going to be the best that it could be. If you want to really understand a coffee and your roasting machine, spending time with one coffee, 5 coffees, and really dialing them in and really understanding what little tweaks in the roasting process, how those little tweaks will result in changes in the cup. If your focus is and your priority is understanding your roaster, understanding your coffees, and understanding yourself as a roaster, start out small and really hone in on that. But yeah, other people have a goal of, I want to put out 24 different coffees. Sure, go for it. I think, and you could learn things about yourself as a roaster by doing that as well, because one crucial component is like you must always cup your coffees. So if you're roasting 24 coffees and cupping 24 coffees, you're going to learn what you really like and what you don't like, because hopefully if you're doing 24 coffees, you're not doing 24 of like the exact same coffee or like very similar coffees. So you can get a wider variety of knowledge of, oh, I really liked this washed coffee and I really didn't like this crazy fermented anaerobic whatever. You'll also learn how different processing methods interact differently in the roaster, because different coffees will take on heat in different ways, and they'll react within the roaster differently. So you'll learn different things about your roasting machine and about the coffees and about yourself by doing that as well. So yeah, I think it really depends on what your goals are. I would say though, starting out, learn your machine, because as each coffee is different, each roaster, each machine is different as well. And so understanding what slight tweaks you can make in your machine, and how that will affect the roasting is really important. I've roasted on a wide variety of roasters, and in some machines, you need to make a really big adjustment for even like a small impact on the roasting process. In other roasters, the tiniest little adjustment, like turning the gas up just a hair, will completely throw like major changes in the roasting process. So understanding the roaster itself is really crucial as well.
This is great foundational knowledge, knowing yourself, knowing your roaster, just having a great mindset going into it. It really takes some self-discipline to have this kind of examination of these base processes. And so if you had to recommend tools with somebody who's already taken these steps and is, doing their due diligence to have an understanding, a deep understanding of what they're doing, who they are, how this all works, the machinery. What are the tools, supplemental tools, that you think everybody would need in the roasting room to help supplement their roasting, that they're just absolutely must-haves?
Yeah, well, I think that there are kind of different categories to this. So there's the practical categories. And I'll say one thing that I don't think is talked about enough is kind of like safety and well-being tools. Like get an anti-fatigue mat, because after standing, especially if you're doing long production days, which can be 8 hours, 10 hours, sometimes 12 hours, especially now as we're approaching the holidays and everybody's ordering, holiday gift coffee. You're going to be standing on likely a concrete floor for hours and hours and hours. So get an anti-fatigue mat, get really sturdy shoes, which will help your ankles, your knees, your back, because yeah, it's hard work on your body. I would also say an ergonomic scoop. Get something, because you have to be scooping coffee all day long. Get something that doesn't hurt your wrist to hold and scoop over and over and over again. Earplugs, I think, are a very good thing, especially if you're in a big warehouse with other loud noises going around, like forklifts and bagging machines and everything.
So the idea of having tools to help you feel comfortable, I think, in some sense, I can imagine there might be some roasters out there. Maybe I would say, I don't want to unfairly categorize, but maybe people that are like, we'll say legacy roasters, really just toughing it out, white knuckling it, proud of the fact that they lost like 10 pounds of water weight in one day, and that type of stuff. But
big water bottle too. That's a good idea. Yes. Get a hydration device.
Oh my God, hydration device. Yes. It would, if you think about it, I mean, some of the worst decisions we make are when we are so fatigued and tired. I mean, talk about impacting the final product. If you're making bad decisions because you are just in pain and just demolished physically, then that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are acute symptoms of that, and then there are longer term symptoms of that. And you don't want to be hurting and in pain at work. In fact, I hadn't been roasting for the last couple of years, and I just started a couple of weeks ago at Black and White. And literally after 2 weeks of working, my upper back, specifically my right shoulder, which I'm right-handed, so I was using my right hand to scoop all of the coffees. My right shoulder was killing me. And I was like, what is going on? Because I had been so out of practice with that motion. I mean, scooping is a very particular motion. You don't necessarily do that in everyday life. But that really I had a hard time sleeping then for a couple of days because my shoulder was in pain. And it also made working difficult because I had to continue to scoop. I switched to my left hand to try and give my right hand a break. But, it impacted the quality of just my everyday, which was unpleasant. So getting things that can make you feel good physically in your body will only improve the process. Because then if you get done with a full day of roasting and you're tired and you're aching and you're hurting, the last thing you're going to want to do is stand around a cupping table and slurp a bunch of coffees. But you can't be a roaster. I believe you can't be a roaster without also being a cupper, without being a taster, because how are you going to know what you're roasting if you don't taste it? How are you going to know what changes you made at the roaster, like how that affected your coffee if you don't try it? So if you're in pain and you're aching and all you want to do is go home at the end of the day, you're not going to want to be engaged with the product.
Yeah, everything tastes like chocolate. Let's go home.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, that is something also, if you're not the roaster, but you are the boss of a roaster, these are things that you should be looking at buying for them. I mean, imagine a lot of roasters who don't necessarily have a budget. They're not given a company credit card, might just be like, well, it'd be nice if the owner would buy that. But
Totally.
I don't feel like I can talk about that. Maybe they should just send them this episode.
Definitely. Yes. Share this episode with your bosses. If you're a roaster that needs a different scoop or a different, the other day at Black and White, I was using the mouse on the computer and it was like sticking and really like causing me a headache, just like because I like, it was really not user friendly. So I asked for another mouse and it worked out. And I asked for an anti-fatigue mat because there wasn't one where I was standing, and they brought me one, and now it's a whole lot more pleasant. So if you're a roaster, I would say like advocate for yourself, because it doesn't do you any good. And ultimately it doesn't do the business any good. It doesn't do the coffee any good if you just sit there and suffer through not being comfortable day in and day out. And if you're a boss an owner of a roastery, and you haven't been a roaster or you haven't worked in a roastery before, please listen to your roaster when they say they need something, when they ask for something that will help their quality of roasting, because that will only benefit you. And also, like, I like to believe that people are good-hearted and that they would want other people to be comfortable. So get your employees the things that they need to do their job.
Exactly. Yes. And if you are here because a roaster recommended you listen to this cool roasting episode, just know we all love you, and you can do it. So welcome.
Thumbs up.
So now, we're talking about I love talking about this subject of comfort. And I think, there's other little tools that we would use in the roasting process that I think are just kind of part of the I think normal scenery. In the article, there's mentioned, like having a bagger or having food safe storage.
Yeah. Oh,
And
well, and also, like I didn't mention, if you're going to be a roaster, you need to have a roasting machine of some sort. So
oh yeah, by the
definitely
way,
got to put that in there.
yeah. So now the complicated stuff, the stuff that people see that, when they go to a larger roaster and they see this, um, you know, color sorting device or,
Mhm.
something like you mentioned, the moisture meters and things. What are the, I would say, semi-essential, or maybe you graduate as a roaster to a certain level of production or scale where it becomes much more feasible for you to have one of these fancy pieces of equipment. What are those pieces of equipment that you think are a little bit more like, yeah, I could see a lot of people having this, even though it does seem exorbitant in its cost, it's actually really useful?
I would say an automatic like weighing machine is definitely high up on the list because I've worked in places where I have been like me as my person has have been the bagger where I have to, put a bag on a scale and scoop until it hits 12 ounces or whatever. And I've also now worked in places that have automatic weighing machines where you basically load an entire batch of coffee into the machine and then it has a scale built in and it has like a little trap door that lets just the amount of coffee you need into the bag. You still need a person to operate it on the devices that I'm talking about, on these machines that I'm talking about. So you still need a person to be there to put a bag basically underneath the chute, but the machine weighs the coffee and it just saves a lot of time and it saves a lot of headache, because bagging can be a very tedious job. So yeah, an automatic weigher. And then if you can, depending on your size, but like a forklift is really, really, really helpful. I would put forklift on the, like if you have a warehouse, even if you're a smaller company, but if you have a warehouse, a forklift instead of a, hand truck is a really helpful tool because then you can get racking in your warehouse so you can stack, uh, you know, stack vertically rather than just on the floor. It also just eases up moving coffee pallets and bags a lot.
Yeah, and I guess if you're not as big as somebody who would need vertical stacking, just entry level, getting like a pallet jack at least.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Is there something that you think is really beneficial for somebody to, for quality control of the coffee that um, there might be a few of these types of machines that we just mentioned earlier. Are there ones that you'd say, I think if we're going to splurge on something that's really going to move the needle on the consistency of our coffee, it would be this device because it will give us a very important data point rather than just a data point that may be a little esoteric and not as practical?
I would say get roasting software, like whether that's, I don't remember all of the different roasting softwares, but Cropster is like the big one. As far as consistency, that will take you, I would say, the farthest because you can see roast to roast how your coffee is roasting. There's also like an Agtron scale, which basically you put your roasted coffee in there and it tells you the color reading. So if your coffee is the same color every time, it theoretically is like going to be consistent. As far as green coffee for quality control, having some sort of temperature and humidity control will definitely help your green coffee stay fresher longer, whether that is a walk-in cooler that you put all of your coffee in, or a dehumidifier, or a humidifier, depending on where you live, and at least meters that can track the ambient temperature and the ambient humidity, so you know kind of what's going on in your warehouse. I suppose those aren't necessarily splurges, just getting meters, but
Well, it's funny because I think there are a lot of roasters out there. This is maybe just my, broad brush stroke of roasters, but they might buy something like an Agtron machine or something like it before they get temperature control. I've worked in roasteries where, in no doubt you have as well, and I've seen like Mark Michelson posting the temperature of the old roasting space at Onyx. It's just fluctuates incredibly, and the controls that you put in place, like you said, will add to consistency. But I also think, like, man, so many coffees have been blamed for inconsistencies when it's actually the ambient temperature. It's like freezing outside. The air is freezing. Given that so many roasters are in dilapidated conditions a lot of times, like taking over an old warehouse space, or, the buildings are tend to be historical and they're like low overhead and they throw the roaster in there, very leaky places. It does seem like a splurge to do that. But I guess the question is, like, what else could you do to really set yourself up for consistency besides that? It seems like that'd be maybe the first thing to do before you even start roasting coffee.
Totally. And that's kind of, I think that's kind of what I was getting at before with in prioritizing tools. Think about the impact that these tools are going to have, because you don't need the biggest, flashiest, whatever, if you don't start out with a consistent, if you don't start out with consistency, if you don't have the foundation. And those things can be really unglamorous, it can be, it seems a lot cooler to get the highest tech sample roaster than it does to get proper insulation in your roastery. Yeah. But a sample roaster can give you good information and can be a really useful tool, but it's not going to do anything for the quality of your final product if what's going on in your sample roaster is not also consistent with what's happening in your production roaster.
Yeah. I think we need to start hyping up insulation. Get some
some
backlit Instagram shots. Here's my insulation.
Well, and this is something that I'll bring up too then, is roaster cleaning. Like, I am a huge proponent of roaster cleaning. I actually truly love cleaning roasters because I love, like, before and after shots are my favorite things. And roasters can get really grimy and really dirty very quickly because the coffee dust and the oils build up really quickly. So if you're not keeping your roaster clean, then your consistency is going to change no matter what else you do, because if you have buildup on the inside of your roaster, it will change the way the heat distributes, it will change the way the air flows, and it will change the way that your coffee roasts, especially in terms of like your thermocouple. Your thermocouple, which is like, what tells the temperature on the inside of the roaster, if that gets gunked up, or if for some reason that's not working properly, or if you have a really old, really thick thermocouple, it's going to be taking incorrect readings. And so if you're not keeping up the basic, maintenance of your roaster, then it doesn't matter anything else you do, because it's going to be inconsistent, and you're not going to know that it's inconsistent if you don't keep checking on just those basic mundane things.
The root causes, right? The things that
totally.
That's so scary to think that you could be making a series of sometimes really expensive decisions and things that impact many, many people. You could switch origins of coffee or producers simply because of an error that you didn't know you had, but you kind of said that it was because of the coffee itself. And it feels like, and this is something I would tell baristas also, I want you to nurse that into that feeling that you can't be comfortable in a space unless you know what's under and behind things. Like what's building up behind the fridge. Like we never pulled it out. We don't know. That bothers me. I want to know, have a like mind that says, well, we pulled it out last week and we know because we cleaned it really well. I want to look at this space and not just be satisfied with the surface, but know that the insides are exactly the way they should be. And then my mind can rest knowing that I'm making good decisions based on actual real data.
Go inside your roaster, look at how the airflow is, look at where buildup happens, keep it clean, and then you'll be able to really work that machine the best that you can.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, when Ernex came out with the roaster spray, you were on like the rampage, showing the roaster cleaning process. It was really amazing to see that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would love to, I had this idea for like, I don't know if you ever watched Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe, like a Discovery Channel or whatever, but I had this like idea. What I would love to do is like literally like a cross country, maybe even a world tour where I go to like the dirtiest roasteries and just open them up and just totally clean them. And like, I would love to do that.
That's amazing. Yes. I see car detailers on YouTube doing that. They're like the dirtiest van ever, like before.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. Definitely keep a lookout, everybody. I think that's got a future. So my final question to you is for roasters out there who need some direction. And I feel like someone in your position that has developed so much intuition, ups and downs in your career have taught you immeasurable amounts of giving you great insights. So I want to ask you how you would recommend roasters focus, especially these days, on developing themselves. First as technicians in their skills, and second as artists. And I guess what I mean by that is there's the science, there's the technical stuff, and then there's that intuition, the artistry that goes along with it, which I think those two things are obviously just two sides of the same coin of roasting.
The top two recommendations I would give are spend time behind the roaster and spend time at the cupping table. And then beyond that, develop a community of people, other roasters, if you can, depending, where you live. Though nowadays we all live so much of our lives online. Like connect with other roasters who are both doing similar things as you, and also roasters who are doing different things, and really learn from them, have conversations with them, taste their coffees, send them your coffee and get feedback on it. Because I think as a profession, roasting, like on a day-to-day level, roasting can be kind of solitary. You're back behind the roaster, staring at a computer screen. I sometimes call it being a glorified Etch-a-Sketch artist, especially with roaster software. Basically, I push buttons to try and trace a little, line on a graph. And it can be kind of isolating. It can be kind of solitary. And so if you can connect with other people, give them feedback, taste what they're doing, talk about what they're doing, and then get feedback on your own stuff, and explain what you did to bring out different flavor notes, you're going to get a lot better, a lot faster, because you'll have more data points really to work with, because you can only spend a certain amount of time behind a roaster, especially if you're not trying to waste a bunch of coffee. You don't want to spend a whole lot of time roasting a bunch of coffee that you're just going to throw away, or that you're gonna not end up using. So if you can taste other people's coffees and get feedback on yours, you're going to learn a lot, keeping in mind both with the technical. So I guess that's probably more on the technical side, but then on the artistry side, you're going to learn through doing that the types of things you like, the types of coffees you like, the types of coffees you prefer to roast. And that's going to be, I think, a way to develop your creative impulses and your intuition, of like, oh yeah, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And I also really hope that everybody doesn't get like doesn't get judgy or discount somebody else's coffee because they don't like it, or take it too personally if somebody else doesn't like your coffee. Because again, different customers prefer different types of coffees. And I really think that there is enough variety of customers out there that just about anything, if you like something, there will be customers who also like that.
In that community, will give you some good feedback, but at the same time, staying in touch with what you value and the people that are around you immediately, your customers also value. That's a great way to balance, all of the feedback you might get from people who have opinions based on their customers that might not be yours.
Totally. And I think then too, so create a community around other roasters, but also talk to your customers and ask them what they like about your coffee and what they would also like. Maybe they'd like to see other things that you roast. If you work for a roasting company that serves the coffee in the cafes, talk to your baristas, ask them what they're liking about the coffee, ask them the feedback they're getting from the customers. This is another point that I'd like to make, is that we as roasters can do everything right or everything wrong. But let's say we do everything right, and then if the espresso machine is dirty, that coffee is going to taste like trash no matter what. Or if the customer, takes it home and their brewing device is dirty, it's not going to taste great. So, as roasters, we're not the end result. We can roast the best coffee to the best, to the best specifications. And there are plenty more variables that occur after that coffee leaves our roastery that we can't control. So also, I like to just take everything with a little humility, with a little, you aren't in control of everything, and that's okay.
Yeah, you know what? Let's bring back in the owners that are here still. The idea of connecting the front of house to the back of house in a way, like knowing that you have the responsibility to be that feedback mechanism for the trajectory of your roastery is so key. And it's so much enmity between the two sides there, where baristas blame roasters and roasters roll their eyes and say, well, you know what, I'm just going to roast, and you keep on thinking that so it does seem like it's more than just like honing in on this one section, but kind of focusing in on how these different areas of the business overlap and influence one another. So it's, maybe communication as a tool is huge. Just like you say, having that feedback, but also making sure that if you're in charge, you're going to say how we become a better roaster is going to be based on how clean our espresso machine is also, as well as the roaster.
Totally. And at Logan House, where I started, we were low enough volume that I still worked 2 days a week in the cafe. So I was lucky enough to have 3 days in the roastery and then 2 days in the cafe, where I got that direct feedback. And not only just from the baristas, but I was also a barista using my coffee in the espressos or in the drip coffees or in the pour overs. And so I had that hand on in the cafe, and I had that direct feedback, but a lot of roasters don't. And so, yeah, I definitely increasing the communication, kind of equalizing and demystifying the roastery, I think, to everyone else in the business, especially like baristas or folks on the production line, can really help increase overall quality and overall connectivity between everyone in the company.
But Kat, we have a lab with the espresso machine in it in the roastery, that's just as good, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, I mean the espresso machine in the lab is never going to experience a Sunday morning rush.
Mm-hmm.
So it's never going to be real world scenario. You can pull an absolutely 100% beautiful shot in a lab and still, if your baristas are disengaged or the machine doesn't get cleaned or whatever, like it's not going to matter how great your coffee is in the lab, except that you get to enjoy it. That's when right. You're when you're there.
Well, Kat, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. How can we stay in touch with you and what you're up to?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. This has been great. I love talking coffee. So anyone out there who wants to reach out to me, please do. I'm often on social media. I have a number of different handles. So you can reach me on Instagram at Coffee Catherine, Kathryn. That's my more personal Instagram. And then I also have a more professional Instagram, which is at roastercat, Kat. That is kind of more I've designated that as more of like a technical roaster specific or like more technical coffee specific Instagram. So follow me over there, send me a message, send me a DM. You can also email me. It's Kat, K-A-T, at coffeepeople.org. And yeah, I am the founder and editor of Coffee People Zine, which is a publication dedicated to celebrating the creativity of the coffee industry. So the Instagram for that is Coffee People Zine. So you can find me there as well. Oh, I also have a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search for Coffee Cat, I have a YouTube channel. Most of my videos are just kind of silly. I started it at the beginning of the pandemic, really to try and improve my editing skills. So I'm not super consistent on that YouTube channel, but I'm trying to be a little bit better. It just takes a lot of time to edit videos.
Yeah. And, maybe we'll stay in touch to also see if you come up with that roaster cleaning reality show.
Yeah. Honestly, I want to do it so bad. I talked to Ernex about it, right before the pandemic. And then of course, in a pandemic, you can't just like pop into different roasteries and be like, hey, I'm going to clean your roaster. So maybe when things are safe and roasteries are more open and everything, that can happen. But
awesome. Well, again, Kat, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that episode and that you got a lot of benefit from Kat's advice and outlook on how to prioritize and select the equipment that you need. There are so many different tools that we can look to get for our roastery. But when we take the time to not just look outward at what we need in the form of physical tools, but also look inward in how we can develop ourselves and balance that technical with the artistic. And I love that Kat has approached it that way in this conversation, and I hope that you apply that to your roastery. So a big thank you to Kat Melheim for joining us on the show. We really appreciate you. Now, if you want to stay in contact with Kat, you can visit her on her various social media accounts. On Instagram, that's at Coffee Catherine, Kathryn. And then there's also the Coffee People Zine, that is at Coffee People Zine, Zine. And then check out Kat's YouTube channel as well. We'll have a link to all those accounts in the show notes. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about this series or any of the episodes published on Keys to the Shop, feel free to send me an email. Chris@keystotheshop.com is how you do that. And I always want to hear from you. I love hearing from listeners of Keys to the Shop. Let me know how this show is helping, maybe how we can improve the content and quality of the shows. It's always a learning process for sure. So again, that's Chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that is the end of our episode today. Really, thank you everyone for joining me on this Rate of Rise series. Don't forget to subscribe to Roast Magazine. If you have not already, go to roastmagazine.com and do that. Have an awesome day. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.